Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm your host, Mary Fran Johnson, CEO of Mary Fran Johnson Media and a contributing writer on CIO.com, where I write about boardroom and career strategy issues for technology leaders. Our sponsor for today's episode is Fairfax County, Virginia's Economic Development Authority. Innovation and opportunity is what Fairfax County has to offer. And you're invited to start or relocate or establish your business in this global technology hub outside of Washington, D.C. The corporate community there is accomplishing mission-critical work and making the world a better place. You can learn more at fairfaxcountyeda.org. We're streaming to you now on LinkedIn and YouTube. And we truly invite our guests that are watching and listening today to send in your questions and join our conversation. Our editors will be watching for those questions and passing them along to me and to today's guest, who is Paul Beswick, the CIO of Marsh McLennan. Marsh McLennan is a Fortune 500 global professional services firm with $20 billion in annual revenue and more than 80,000 employees of advising clients around the world in 130 different countries. The firm is comprised of 4 operating companies: Marsh, Guy Carpenter, Mercer, and Oliver Wyman. And they offer everything from risk advisory services and insurance solutions to retirement, capital investment strategies, and management consulting. Paul was appointed CIO in January of 2021, and he oversees more than 4,000 technologists who are supporting the company and its 4 global businesses. Before his current role, he was the global head of the digital practice at Oliver Wyman, and he spent 23 plus years at the company working in various sectors and doing management consulting and work in retail, transportation, telecom, and consumer goods. It's great to have you here today, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary Fran. It's such a pleasure to be able to do this in person as well.
Isn't it? It feels so amazing. I keep wanting to call attention to look, we're in person. We're around a table here in Needham, Massachusetts. It's very exciting. Okay, let's start. Marsh McLennan's business is complex and global. So start us out at that 30,000-foot view of how the businesses have been doing around the world and how your customers are faring through these as we enter year 3 of what we hope is a soon-to-be wrapping-up pandemic, but one never knows.
Yes, so I started this role about 6 weeks before the pandemic started, and I'm sure we'll get later to the arc of that story for us. But Marsh McLennan is the company that I've given my career to. I actually started as a summer job out of university originally, and as you noted at the beginning, I've been here for 25 years now.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate that my first year as CIO was the year we celebrated our 150th anniversary. When we got to ring the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And it was probably our most successful year ever over the course of that 150 years.
Nice.
So while it's been an incredibly challenging environment in terms of keeping ourselves operating efficiently and dealing with the fact that everybody's been remote, it's been a remarkable period of time for the firm as a whole across all of those businesses.
Yes. Well, and that makes sense, too, because there are so many issues and problems that companies have to solve, and everyone has been in some form or another of isolation trying to do it.
Absolutely. And our focus is on risk, it's on strategy, and it's on people, and all of those are enormous issues for every big company around the world at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is the first time you've been a full-blown CIO, but you have been working in technology and risk strategy for quite a while. Talk a little bit about coming into the CIO role and maybe start with why you wanted to be a CIO after 25 years of all sorts of other successful business roles.
Why I was persuaded that I wanted to be a CIO.
Persuaded. You were talked into it, were you?
I was. So I was with Oliver Wyman since I left university, and I worked in a lot of different areas. But early on, I started to focus on the retail sector. And the retail sector is still an area that's enormously fascinating to me because it's such a low margin, highly competitive business that every little bit of edge that you can get is enormously important for how effective you can be and how competitive you are. So a lot of the work that we did over that time was very focused on using the enormous amounts of data that retailers collect.
Of course.
And using that to help make all those thousands of daily decisions a little bit better, that would allow you to eke out a few more tenths of points of margin, and allow you to be successful and survive in an incredibly competitive marketplace. That got me interested in that whole area. And over time, the capabilities that we'd built within the retail practice, which I ran in North America for about 8 years, started to show that they were more generally valuable to a lot of our clients in many, many different sectors. So we created a team that was called Oliver Wyman Labs. It was really focused on data engineering, data science, decision-making tools, and sort of rapid application development to support a lot of the consulting work we did. That then became one of the founding pieces of our digital practice, which I then went on to run. And that got me involved in many of the digital transformation challenges of many of our clients in a lot of different sectors.
Yes.
And so I started to find myself being drawn closer and closer into this technology space, because we all know no business really succeeds now without having figured out how to bring technology to the way that it operates in an effective manner. So I ended up doing some consulting work for my predecessor in this job, working on what the technology strategy should be for Marsh McLennan.
Right.
At the end of which I was persuaded that perhaps I ought to see if my cooking tasted as good as I thought it did.
Yes.
And come on and try and lead that transformation by actually taking on the management role. So that's what I did.
Well, and I love, it's an unusual career transition, because most of the, especially CIOs that I know, get to some point where they themselves go into consulting. And a lot of times they're frustrated with it because they bring their great advice to the table and it doesn't get followed. And so a lot of them end up transitioning back into CIO roles because there's something about having your hands on the wheel, as it were.
Yes. And I worked with a number of ex-CIOs in my digital practice who experienced exactly that. It was a real challenge for them. And I'm certainly enjoying the rather more direct path between strategy and execution. The great fear when you leave consulting is that you end up losing the variety.
Yes.
That you have within consulting. But I've certainly not found that to be a big problem for us. There's an enormous amount of stuff going on. It's fascinating. It keeps me interested. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. Well,
and you made a remark about how, especially because of all the issues and challenges during the pandemic, that essentially technology organizations are winning the argument now that technology can be the answer to delivering the future. And yes. I love that remark. I thought that it was just it's a very elegant way to put what is really a lot of nuts and bolts about making everything working together. Talk a little bit more about your views on the CIO role and the way it's balancing all those different business and technology and people and risk issues.
Yes, so it's a broad scope of responsibility, and I'm blessed that I've got a very strong team who take care of the day-to-day aspects of that on so many fronts all the time, and that allows me to focus on some of the more long-term sort of transformational parts of the role. But there's a lot that happens within an IT organization that is a lot of work to make sure things don't go wrong, that hopefully no one ever sees, and therefore is often underappreciated.
Yeah, the keeping the lights on.
Yeah, but keeping on the lights on, I think almost it downplays too much quite how much discipline, focus, and care is taken to make sure that keeping the lights on is easy.
Well, and how complex business processes are. And because I know we're going to talk more about that. When we were getting ready for this interview, you talked about the way applications as the focus is often the wrong way to look at things, because you have to look underneath it at the business process. And that may involve several different applications that need to come into play. And of course, that speaks to the complexity of it.
Absolutely. I've increasingly been coming to the view that applications are a problem in terms of the way that they shape how IT organizations work.
Interesting.
See if I can describe what I see as the issue. So companies like to give senior management attention to things that are big problems. It's not worth senior management spending their time on small things. And therefore, in order to get something to happen that involves technology, you have to make it a big enough problem with a big enough prize to get the attention, to get funded, and to go somewhere.
Okay.
And so you tend to bundle a lot of things together to create something that is big enough.
Like an omnibus bill for IT spending.
Right. And because you do that, for a lot of people within the business, this might be the only chance in the next 3 to 5 years to get all the things that they want to happen. So they have to throw it in as well.
Yeah.
And the answer to that, when you're tackling a broad scope of things in one go to a deadline and under funding pressure, is the gravitational force brings you back to building one thing, and it's very difficult to maintain the discipline not to build a monolith.
An ERP system.
Well, indeed. And of course, that is an expensive thing to do. It's also a thing that locks in a level of capability that is very hard to change later. And so what you achieve now slows down what you can achieve later because you have to unpick all the compromises you made along the way.
Right.
And of course, now it's big, expensive, risky, so you have to pile in risk mitigation and governance around it, and that makes it bigger and more expensive and in some ways riskier.
Yeah.
So I slightly facetiously sometimes call this approach prepaying for failure. Unfortunately, you
that
also
must be popular with the CEO.
well, quite. Unfortunately, you also pay for failure on the back end as well.
Yeah.
And so we've been looking at trying to find a different way to go about this that comes back to what we're actually trying to model. What we're actually trying to model are the business processes. Those are our building blocks. If you think about the process and the individual tasks as discrete steps along the way,
Yes.
your standard is simply, can I make this better in a step? And then I can take another step later and then another step later. I don't have to try and leap up a staircase from the bottom to the top in one go.
Okay.
I can go step by step by step. So we're working on trying to create a framework that lets us do that systematically across our business.
And so this is an enterprise architecture framework, or is it
Yes.
more than that?
It's an enterprise architecture framework, but it's supported by a choice of technologies within our stack that are designed to help us get there.
Okay.
And it's supported by starting the process of changing how we think about how we fund projects and how we agree what's going to go forward and how we release funding for them. That's quite different to how we've done it before. Now, we're at the early stages of this. We certainly haven't mastered this yet, but we've seen some good early wins.
Well, and I've been having a lot more really interesting and going down different kind of pathway conversations with CIOs recently about the different ways that they're doing their IT funding and budgeting because of the way work has changed over the last. That's why there's so many future of work summits and episodes going on in different shows and everything, because the way that people are working together and the way we use technology took, in some ways, so many great steps forward during these pandemic years. And that is actually starting to have a long echo effect in the way budgets are put together. Before we get into that any further, I wanted to circle back. I said in your introduction how complex and global your business is, Marsh McLennan.
Yes.
So take a minute to tell us about how it's organized in the different pieces and how your role as the enterprise CIO is not changing all of that, but approaching it in a different way.
Yep. So Marsh McLennan's been going through an evolution fairly continuously for a little while now, where each of those four businesses were fairly independent in terms of the way they operated. We've long had a shared infrastructure organization since about 2006, and that's done great things in terms of raising standards in terms of how we manage infrastructure, in terms of how we handle security and driving a lot of cost out. But other than that, the businesses effectively operated reasonably independently. Over time, we've been coming closer and closer together, both from a commercial perspective and looking for ways to leverage that expertise for the benefit of clients more systematically, but also from an operating model perspective. And technology has been one of the areas we've probably had more dramatic shift in the last little while than anywhere else.
Yeah, I would think so.
So when I came in as the deputy CIO, we were just at the start of a process of bringing the technology organizations together into one group. So we formed what we now call MMC Tech. The solid line reporting relationships for the CIOs of those groups now run into me. That was previously, my predecessor was sort of coordinator
Right.
of the different IT functions rather than sort of leader of the combined group. And that's really put us in a much better place to leverage our scale, to deal with basic things like standardization, reuse of technology, managing our negotiating leverage, and so on. But the four businesses camouflage the real complexity of the business. Trying to manage four businesses in four different sectors and find an effective way to build a technology organization to support that is fairly difficult.
I would think.
But actually, when you dig into each one of those, they all have a collection of businesses within them. So within Oliver Wyman, we have Nero and we have Lippincott, and within Marsh, we have Victor and we have Marsh McLennan Agency, and Mercer, we have Metal and Darwin and a number of other things, and so on. So there's all this complexity under the surface as well.
Yeah, it's a huge matrix.
Absolutely.
In a way, yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that as we've built the strategy for MMC Tech, while we are now one team, we've been very, very clear this is not a centralization strategy.
Yeah, so it was interesting when we were talking about this earlier and you made that point, it's not centralization.
Right.
It sounds initially like, oh, it's the pendulum swinging back from decentralized to centralized, but it's something new. It's,
no, I think
it's
that
a combination.
I think centralization is a trap.
Okay.
And in many ways, one of the most difficult things that I find in my role is the balancing act. It's walking that tightrope between driving enough consistency and coordination to get better results out of the combined team and to show that it is stronger together, and not ending up driving business strategy inappropriately through the back door, or failing to understand the complexity and the variation that's within all those different organizations, which is too complicated for any central team to master on its own. We have to have real partnership with all of those parts of the business down locally in each of those areas. Otherwise, we're going to be delivering stuff that doesn't meet their needs.
Right, and that's the usual complaint, especially with a big far-flung company around the globe, is, they just don't understand back in the head office.
Right,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, they must have a hard time saying that to you, though, because you've been out working amongst so many of them in your previous role through the digital practices.
Well, I think that helps. They're very welcome to say it to me, and I encourage them to say it to me if they think that it is the case.
Okay.
Because, as I say, this is the tightrope that I'm trying to walk.
Yes.
But I think because I've worked for so many different companies in my consulting career, because I've been a customer of this organization within Oliver Wyman for 23 years before I was involved in leading it, I think I've got a pretty good level of sensitivity as to how this is all experienced when you get to the front line of the business. And that's the important thing, that we don't win or lose in the marketplace with our technology directly. We win or lose with clients.
With what you deliver.
Against our competitors, with the quality of what we deliver. And technology is a massively important enabler of that and of our operational efficiency. But it's not the front line.
Right. The business itself and the business process is more on the front line,
right,
with the technology fueling it, accelerating it, enabling it.
Back in my retail days, one of the things that I'm most proud of as a little vignette, because I think the same thing is true in retail. The front line is the stores.
Yes. Storefront operations is everything.
Encouraging a retailer to rename corporate headquarters store support center, to help them think about culturally how important it is to think about where you're actually winning, because it is natural at the center of a big organization to feel like you're sitting on top of it all. And I think that's a dangerous way of thinking.
Well, what are You'd mentioned, of course, when so it's not a big centralization project, but you have shared services. You're bringing various parts together, and I know that saves money. That gives you greater scalability in areas. You also had mentioned that it does different things in unlocking innovation. Talk about that a little bit. Innovation is one of those big fuzzy feel-good words, I guess, that everybody, leadership and innovation and digital transformation, all that stuff. And tell us a story about some innovation that has been unlocked this way.
Yeah, so I think innovation, you're right, it's a very fuzzy word. It's something we all like to feel we're doing, but innovation for the sake of it isn't something we're in the business of. Innovation for the sake of...
I never even know what people mean when they say that. Innovation for the sake of it. It's sort of like...
I mean, I think if you're doing, primary scientific research on things, fair enough.
Fair enough, but I'd call that R&D.
Yeah.
And you probably were doing a bit of that in the labs. It was at
yes, absolutely. And we have lab groups within a sort of broader tech universe within Marsh McLennan that are doing some of that as well. I think that's important. I think it helps make sure you're in touch with all the different capabilities that are out there. You're thinking ahead and thinking about the ways that technology can change how you operate.
Yes,
whether it's external disruption or what opportunities you can find for yourself.
Yeah,
but I think of my role very much as perhaps my most important responsibility is to raise the speed limit of the business as a whole, and to find ways to sort of ungum what can often be slow bureaucratic processes.
Yes.
What can be slow, expensive ways of doing things and replace them with faster and more nimble ones. And the structure that we've created is designed to enable that, so that we are leveraging our scale and standardizing around things where we can invest to be able to unlock, to streamline, to simplify, to allow things to go straight through. So to give an example, we're I'm sure we're not unique in this, but we have a strategy to develop our sort of operating system, our platform as a service, which embeds our controls, our processes directly within it, so that someone picking up a new project doesn't have to spend the time worrying about how to meet those controls because they're fundamentally built into the platform. I've given a challenge to my team, which I think we've hit once, but we'll hit it increasingly often as we go forward, which is we need to be able to conceive a project on Monday and get it into production on Friday of the same week. And everything that's getting in the way of our ability to do that is something we need to be focusing on engineering out. Now, we won't do that for most of our projects, clearly.
Right.
But we should be able to do it for some of our projects. And that's partly about how we define what a project is.
Okay. Yeah.
So back to the point about applications and processes. You can't build an application in 5 days. You can take on a step in a process and make it better if you've got a scaffolding that you can hang it on that allows you to just make that step better.
Right, and you can show it a little more visually, actually, in fact, this reminds me, you had said one of the examples of the innovation and the changes is you have a development center of excellence now that you did not have before.
Right.
That might be a good one to talk a little bit more about, because since we're on the Monday to Friday goal
absolutely.
there.
And so that group is right in the heart of figuring out how to meet that challenge. And they're both helping our development teams all around the organization, bringing them better coaching and structure around agile development practices. But they're an arm of my enterprise architecture group. We've decided that enterprise architecture is obviously an important discipline.
Yes.
But I want it to be more than sort of rule setting, more than a policeman role. I want the translation of our architectural strategy into the toolkit that we give people to be tightly linked.
Okay.
So if we say that our strategic platform for deploying stuff is, we call it OSS2, it's fundamentally Kubernetes based, and our code repository is GitHub, the tools need to be there so that when someone can get a repo on GitHub, they can get it quickly. It comes with the deployment pipelines automatically that get you to that platform. That platform embeds within it the security controls that we need, so that the development team doesn't have to spend a lot of time worrying about it. So the partnership between that development center of excellence, who have the developer angle on this and represent them, and my MGTI team, my global infrastructure team, who are building and own the platform, is a really important one for being able to build that capability out.
Interesting.
They're also doing things like building out template projects. So again, you can pick up something that is a secure, standards-based, deployable project, application. I shouldn't say application, but I'm going to say application.
I know, because we were trashing applications just a little while ago.
that you can get up and running within an hour or so, actually deployed. Now, it doesn't do what you need it to. It's an empty shell, if you like. It's a secure empty shell that deploys.
But it's more than a PowerPoint presentation.
Well, quite. And so then you can do what you need to inside that, and you have all the toolkit and the standards-based approach. And so it gives you a much faster way to get there. So they're building out things like that to help speed us up.
Well, and I know later we're going to touch a little bit more on the enterprise data strategy and how that ties into being able to do all this.
Yeah.
But we have a question from our alert and listening and watching audience, and it's perfect because we're here talking about development, and that leads you to think about talent. How are you addressing and navigating the tech talent shortage? What have you seen? What has Marsh McLennan, MMC Tech, what have you experienced through the Great Resignation? How are things going with that? How are you approaching tech talent? And I find it's a question I ask over and over and always with CIOs, because it's innovation, cybersecurity, and talent are the top three on everybody's kind of concern list.
Yes.
So speak to talent. What do you have to tell us on that?
So the talent story over the pandemic's been interesting. What we haven't seen is a Great Resignation. We've seen an increase in attrition more recently in some places. But until recently, it's predominantly looked like it's delayed attrition that we would have had in the height of the pandemic that we didn't have.
Okay.
So if you sort of stack the 2 years,
it's sort of like an echo
over that
of it.
entire period of time, we've probably had less attrition in total than we would have done in a normal 2 years.
Okay.
But that's not to say it's not a problem. It's not to say we're not worried about it. Making sure you have the best talent and hang on to the best talent is obviously enormously important for us. It's a very competitive marketplace. There's certainly it's certainly a tough marketplace to hire in right now. There are some places where we're having to build pipeline ahead of demand to make sure that we've got people ready to go when attrition inevitably happens, to make sure we're in good shape. That's particularly true in India.
Interesting.
But I think the other thing is, my hope is that good talent will stay with us because they're excited about the work they do. They're seeing the ability to have more impact. They're spending less time dealing with frustrating processes and more time creating value.
Yeah.
And importantly, and this is an area that I think we've made some progress, but we have further to go, we're able to sketch a career path for them that shows them where they're going, not just now, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now. What are the things that they... what can they see their career developing into? Because if you don't provide an internal outlet for people's ambition, you either get unambitious people, which is not going to drive the type of organization we want to be, or you lose them. And so one of the good things about the creation of MMC Tech as a structure has been, actually there are more career paths available now than there were when you were within one business's IT organization or you were within one of the constituent entities, because people can move across, they can develop broader skills from doing that, they can round themselves out and build their careers that way.
Can they also move in and out of the tech organization into different areas of the business and then come back? I know that can. CIOs often talk about that, but then they find it difficult to practice it because they're losing a really talented person.
Everyone finds it hard to let people go. I actually think we've been. I think we've been pretty good. The leaders of my various teams, I think, have been actually remarkably good about lateral movement between teams and what they get for it.
Good. Good.
It's certainly created problems, but it's all been done in the right spirit.
And-
In and out of IT, it certainly happens. I couldn't tell you happens particularly more often or less often than anyone else.
Well, people do self-select into IT jobs and career paths, mainly because they really didn't want to work in marketing and they didn't want to do business development. You know, I mean, there are definite predilections, I think, especially that draw people into technology. I had another question I wanted to ask about that, and I think now it's flying out of my head. Oh, you had mentioned that you're doing that MMC Tech has strengthened entry-level recruiting.
Yes.
Going after it may be hard to find, but there's more and more talent coming out of colleges and universities.
Yep.
How has that changed?
So early days, but we're starting to build up a program that we really haven't had for a long time, again, outside of India. It sort of comes back to that point about career. If you're going to offer people careers, you have to make sure that the people who are within your existing team can grow into more senior roles. If
Yes.
you only hire laterally for people who have vast amounts of pre-existing experience, then you aren't offering the opportunities for your internal people.
Right.
And if you're doing that and you're moving them up, then you have to replace from the bottom of the organization rather than just sort of uniformly throughout the entire pyramid. And so it's necessary for us to bring people in at early stages in their careers, so let them grow their careers with us. And we get a lot of talent, a lot of energy that way. But importantly, it also creates a system where we're focusing on people being able to grow their careers over the long run.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than your career grows only by moving somewhere else.
Yes, and that is a very stultifying effect in industries where the only way you can get ahead or make more money is essentially to leave and go to a competitor.
Right.
And of course, in the management consulting and global practices, there are lots of big, well-known brand names in that you probably don't want to lose people to. We have another question, and I think you'll like this. It's right up your strategic alley here. How do you integrate multiple narratives from different businesses into a larger narrative for a coordinated strategic plan? That's kind of that. That should be right up your alley. Yeah.
So I think partly by choosing where you're writing the narrative. So I'm not attempting to write the narrative of how Mercer best competes in its career segment.
Okay.
That's
That makes
Mercer's
sense.
narrative to write.
Right.
Our job is to help them bring the technology to play in the right way. We actually ran through an exercise beginning of last year to define what the MMC Tech culture should be. And because we had different cultures from all the constituent parts of the team.
Yeah.
That had just evolved naturally because they were evolved in different businesses or they were playing different functional roles. And what we did was we ran a bottom-up exercise to canvass the entire organization about what they thought was important. And perhaps not to our great surprise, but encouragingly, what came back was the kind of things that you'd want to hear. They recognized we needed to be stronger together. That we needed to be agile, that we needed to be risk aware, that we needed to focus on technical and operational excellence. And I'm going to have to remind myself because I can always
Perfectly okay. I'm working from notes.
Exactly.
You're entitled to as well.
And of course, I've missed the most important one of all, which is to be customer focused and to recognize that we're not the important ones in the system. We're part of the system, but what we're focusing on is clients and our own customers.
Yeah.
So that's what came up sort of organically from the group, and we've helped rally around that. Because it came up organically, it's not completely divorced from what was already the foundational cultures of
It's
those
more you're
teams.
codifying what was reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then our shared mission, as opposed to our separate missions, our shared mission is around raising the speed limit. It's around being a better organization, delivering better technology faster and cheaper to our businesses, and everyone has that challenge.
Yes, yeah, there are some things I ask about sometimes agility and speed of the organization, and sometimes I get a little bit of a cross-eyed look from CIOs. They're like, "When was that not important?"
Right.
And it really is. But I was thinking of the. In terms of pulling everything together into the strategic narrative, you had told me something about it was a policy document that went from 130 pages to just 29. It was
Yes.
about strategy. Tell me what that was, because you said now you've got something that people will actually read.
Right. Well, so a big focus in sort of ungumming things is to simplify. And one of the things that gets creepingly complex over time are policies and controls and governance forums and all that sort of stuff. It's important, but it's also not what gets most people particularly excited. We've recently created a policy council to review and manage all of our policies across technology. The first one they've gone after is our information security policies.
Perfect.
As part of that, we moved from 10 different documents of 130 pages in total to one, and it's probably just grown because this happens. It's now 33, not 29. But maybe we can squeeze it back down again. But certainly
Smaller
significantly less than it was before.
Yeah.
Which it clarifies what's needed. It draws the connection back to the controls better. It's more accessible and digestible, and therefore much more likely to be consistently followed without and earlier in the process, rather than being caught later and causing more time and rework when we get to that stage.
Okay.
And we're working through more and more policies like that on a systematic basis, but also anything that isn't the direct delivery of value in the form of features within the applications we're building or within the projects we're delivering.
Yeah. Well, and you'd mentioned too when we talked previously that you've done a lot of work on the different platforms. We were talking about self-service capabilities that were needed, and you referred to something you called the golden path through the process, have it clear and signposted.
Yes.
That sounds like something almost anybody could follow, but this you're talking about very specific. Is this business processes or
so
technologies?
back to that 5-day challenge. The aim here is to be clear. We can't afford to simplify everything.
No, that's why legacy and technical debt is still
Absolutely.
existing, because it would be so horrendously expensive
And
to
if
just
we
try to replace
let
it.
the organization loose on any technology that happens to take their fancy this week,
Yeah.
and I know because I still play around with stuff myself, it's very easy to get excited by something because it looks cool and
Yes.
new. And the organization is thankfully full of people who get excited by things like that.
You actually want those people.
You want that,
that are
absolutely.
experts in Kubernetes.
Right.
and-
But
yeah.
we can't streamline the sort of ancillary surrounding processes for absolutely everything. So we have to pick. We have to pick the sort of strategic core of how we want to do things and streamline that. That is the golden path. If you follow this, then you can pretty much get down to writing the the capabilities you need, putting the features in. You don't have to worry about the other stuff because it's taken care of. So, for instance, if you deploy on OSS2, our strategic platform, all the security is built in. You don't have to spend separate time figuring out how to scan your code and make sure that the firewall rules are right and all that sort of stuff. It's all dealt with.
Interesting.
Whereas if you do something else, then you're sort of on your own. Now, not everything, so that's the golden path, the simple, straightforward, easy way through. And the key is to tell people that that's what it is. And they have a choice. You don't have to do that because it actually won't work for everything.
That's
But just understand
psychologically
the consequences
smart.
of not choosing to go down that path are you're choosing to go down a different path.
Yeah.
So the sort of mental analogy I have is you're approaching the edge of a dark forest. There's a road paved straight through the middle of it. Your goal is to get to the other side of the forest. Do you want to I just follow the road. I want you to just follow the road. That's the easiest way.
Yeah.
Now, there may be reasons why you can't. You maybe need to take a detour. There may be something like a good example is you might need to be able to connect from some service that runs in our DMZ to something on the internal network. We don't allow that. So you've got to find a way to allow that communication to happen that's secure. So that happens often enough that we want to say there's a path here. It's not a road, it's a path. We've designed a preferred approach for this. We've pre-approved it. Use that. Don't invent something new. So there are detours that we're trying to sign as detours. They're not going to be as easy as the road, but they are ways that you can get there that we've done before, we've thought through. They're not going to be that painful. And then there's blundering off into the trees. We want to stop people blundering off into the trees.
It's like that moment in horror movies where the girl decides to run into the dark forest rather than toward the lights.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was also making me think of the Tina Turner song about doing things nice and easy or nice and rough. We had also talked about a big, and in fact, I want to revisit this because you said applications are often themselves the problem. And I found that especially entertaining because we have a vast vendor community and technology providers who are very busy selling every application and every piece of it as the solution. And I wonder if we haven't just kind of been gradually brainwashed over the decades to see applications as a solution to a problem. So I really like that out-of-the-box thinking where the application is more of the problem.
Yeah, and let me be clear, our vendors provide us many really important things.
Yes, and
we're
not throwing them under the bus. No, I know that, but
I also think
the rhetoric.
Absolutely. I also think that there are traps here because what tends to happen is these things have a gravitational attraction and they suck features into them. And so they get more varied and more complicated over time. And when that happens, they're harder to unpick later. I like to, I hope this isn't universally the case, but I like to start from the assumption that pretty much every decision we make today, we're going to regret 5 years from now. And so starting to think now about how we're going to unpick this decision when something better has come along is a good discipline.
Interesting.
Things that...
Kind of like a prenup.
Quite.
A technology prenup.
I don't apply this to my personal life.
No, of course not.
But I think that discipline is useful, and it also explains why I think there's a danger in the sort of black hole application. Whether that's an application you're building that's sucking in new requirements.
Okay.
Or it's something that you've bought that you keep trying to customize around. Rather than saying, it fits in this box, what I need in terms of sort of differentiated experiences and agile improvements and enhancements to this for my processes should sit around it. Because those are the things I'm much more likely to change. If I buy the right application, it'll last me for a long time if I don't try and do too much with it.
Okay.
The stuff that I'm going to change much more frequently to support an ever-evolving business is the stuff that needs to be small, lightweight, easy to decouple, easy to change in an incremental and atomic way.
Like microservices.
Or micro front ends or simple process task runners, those sorts of things. An assembly of those things is inherently easier to change.
Yes, that makes sense.
And given I will probably want to change them all in the next 5 years at some level, or at least want the ability to, then that's an important part of doing it. Plus, back to the point about funding these projects and what the funding models are, taking on one of those is a relatively small, easy to agree to project.
Right. You're not signing on to the omnibus bill. Yeah. Well, and I know we've had over many years, we've had people, speakers get up and talk about trying to decouple or uncouple from a massive, a manufacturing, an MES system or an ERP system. And I remember how much the game started changing 5 to 10 years ago with new technologies, with microservices. And I would think on the flip side, that also attracts those talented people that you want in your development center of excellence, because they actually do get to play with they get to work with,
Work and play. It's good when they're close.
And if you're not sure which one you're actually doing,
right.
That's good too. I every time you talk about increasing the speed of the organization and the speed of the response, I like that so much because I've always viewed technology. This is my prejudice against the word alignment. About how I don't like to think of technology leaders as needing to align technology with business strategy. I like the accelerate word.
Yes.
Accelerate with business strategy, and that just feels like more fun for everybody.
Yeah,
and when you talk about increasing the speed of the organization, we have a question from our listening audience. Paul, as the CIO, how are you helping businesses become agile and respond to changes faster? And I'm assuming there that he doesn't mean the technology organization, because we've already talked a lot about that, but then the individual businesses themselves. So if you've got a good, anecdotal example you can pull up, that would be great.
Yes. So I think I mentioned earlier, one of the things we do in our development center of excellence is we have an agile coaching capability that we've built up internally.
We hadn't talked about that yet.
To help support those teams. But you can't do agile in isolation.
No, it has to
be
technology
business teams
and
can
tech.
want to, but if they don't have the enabling technology to move at the speed they need to, which we've talked about, and the business isn't prepared to be part of that exercise and engage in that way, it doesn't really work. And so that coaching is at least as much about working with the business on things. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is part of the responsibility I think we have to make sure that we aren't simply trying to align with business strategy, is to show possibility to the business and to show what technology can do for them. And the examples that we have in some of our labs areas, skunkworks projects we do from time to time, or even just a great project from business unit A that we're showing off in business unit B or C,
right,
that shows the speed that you can move at when you get things right and the impact that it can have. I think helps the business understand the value. Agile's got a little bit of a bad rep in some businesses because I think companies have the IT departments have bought into it, and the business partners generally haven't to quite the same extent. And so you can end up with this perception that it's an excuse not to have figured out up front what it is you're going to do and how. And it's just a free for all.
Because you're so busy having stand-up meetings and that kind of stuff.
It's not the highly disciplined process that it has to be. And so showing the wins, showing the things that you have turned around in a few days. So we had to build a sanctions tracker for tracking Russian sanctions and whether to make sure that we weren't violating any of them.
Okay.
One of the teams in my corporate information solutions area managed to knock something up in about 4 days to do that. And so that's a great example.
That made it within the Monday to Friday. Yeah. And is it being used?
It is, yeah.
Where it needs to be.
Yep. But it's also an example of what is possible. And we're working on within our own organization, raising our own belief as to what is possible. But we also are working on with the rest of the organization, their belief in what is possible and what we can be the answer to.
Well, and this must appeal so greatly to a lot of your, especially your greatest technology talent, because who doesn't love a problem that looks insoluble and that they get to actually put their hands on it and then to do something within a few days?
Yeah.
That is, I could see how that could be a big talent magnet.
Yep.
And it's just, I was thinking when you were talking about the ability to show, to kind of like you're bringing the future to the present in a way, saying, here's what we could do, and let us mock something up for you. I remember years ago, someone told me that the ultimate marketing goal was to give people something they never knew they always wanted.
Yes.
And when IT can do that, it's like it changes perceptions about technology. And, I really like to think that overall technology will start becoming a more appealing profession. That when we won't, because I feel like we've been talking about the talent crisis and the talent challenge and the shortages for the entire time that I've been an editor and a journalist in technology. It goes back forever. And that it may be like the problem of, like what's wrong with the public schools? Everybody's always got something to say about that. And I feel like that happens with technology too. I want to pivot over. You had another example that we talked about briefly about how you're leveraging things that happen in different areas of MMC Tech. And one of your examples was the team at Mercer leading the charge in the reorganization and the development teams.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I thought that was a good example of the way you're cross-pollinating and sharing ideas.
Yes, I mean, each of the different teams that make up MMC Tech was ahead in some areas and behind in others. Mm-hmm. And so just sharing across the strengths of different areas and having it be better taken advantage of everywhere else has been great. Mercer had been going through a transformation of their development team into a pods and squads model. They've also been leading the charge on what they call metered funding, where more projects start as a quick, rapid test and learn phase before getting access to the money to actually sort of fully develop them. A lot of ideas then get killed at that first stage, so we don't spend on the wrong things.
Right.
And that's significantly sped up, and that's now being cut across into Marsh and Guy Carpenter, and I think has already been partly adopted at Oliver Wyman. So that model has been a great source of very tangible evidence that this can work. And it's much easier to get people to buy into something that is already demonstrated than something that's a theoretical construct. So where we have things areas that have led like that, it's great. One of the other things we've done, Oliver Wyman had a team that supported end user computing that was separate from the main group within a global infrastructure area. That's obviously enormously important for consultants because they live on their laptops.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
that's why it
developed. You made the point at one juncture when we were talking that you're not trying to create self-driving cars.
Right.
This is advice and consulting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So those teams were brought together, and by being able to join forces, they've been able to bring some really good wins to the end user experience. The one that jumps to mind is we've been going through upgrades of the Microsoft Office suite on everyone's computers, which used to be a multi-hour process where someone would lose access for a while. Can now be run in the background, and the user only loses access for I think about 8 minutes.
Nice.
Because those teams have been able to collaborate and bring that expertise to everyone, that's impacting 82,000 people.
Yes.
That's a lot of minutes. That adds up.
That is. And that's a lot of people feeling very happy thoughts
sadly,
about their tech
they probably
organization.
didn't notice because they didn't get to compare one the other side by side.
That's kind of the downside with you getting. My mother used to say, "Don't be too wonderful."
So one of the things that we've been doing, which I think technology organizations are generally not great at, is a bit of internal marketing.
Thank goodness.
We've done an enormous amount of stuff for colleagues over the last 2 years. The pandemic has absolutely accelerated how people work and use technology.
Yes.
And it's accelerated what we deliver to them. But it all happens at different points in time. A lot of it's invisible. So we've actually gone out and we put together a nice video explaining all the things that we've given them, and
that's great.
Put it in front of them to make sure that they understood that all this work is going on to continually improve their experience. And we're going to keep doing that on a regular basis, because if you don't talk about it, it's taken for granted.
That's right. And I'm just so happy to hear that, because I think for the last 5 to 10 years, I've been harping on this point with all my CIO friends. It's like going into someone's LinkedIn profile and they haven't updated it in 5 years. And it's sort of like, and you talk about wanting to attract technology talent,
Right.
CIOs used to think that marketing that way was beneath them somehow, but I think everybody has just kind of gotten that religion finally, which is it's a huge improvement. We have a very big picture question for you, and then I want to make sure in our last few minutes I have a couple other things I want to ask you about. So, how do you align your technology transformation with organizational change? This is another kind of
with organizational change.
I don't know whether to tell you to put on your consulting experience hat there or your CIO hat, or maybe it's somehow both.
I mean, I think that organizational change is a tool within transformation. I mean, the way we are organized to deliver against our goals is an important part of it.
Yes.
So, simply changing the reporting lines of the business unit CIOs to go into the enterprise CIO changes the ability to create a sense of shared team, a sense of kind of commonality of approach.
Okay.
That you'd think shouldn't make as much difference as it does, but it does. Similarly, we created a new shared service called Application Management Services. So it's basically taking a lot of the stable part of the application estate and moving the support and maintenance of that, plus a lot of our database management, into a group that does in theory, a lot of the same things that were already being done by many of the same people within the businesses when that capability sat there. But by putting it in a group, by having them focus on that alone, it changes how people think about the relative importance of that. And so we're getting a massively different level of innovation in how that stuff is being tackled.
Interesting.
Simply because it is in a group and that is their sole area of responsibility. So that's driving a lot more automation into areas that were lightly automated before. We're changing our resourcing model with respect to what we do and what vendors do. That's proved to be a driver of cost savings, but also allowed us to divert a lot of resource onto enhancement that was previously simply run the business spend. So organization is a tool in how you transform, and organizations that have well-defined goals that align with where your transformation is trying to take you are an important aspect of getting there, I think.
Well, and it establishes mission and purpose and ownership.
Yes.
Which everybody, that idea of agency is something that I think we seem to be paying a lot more attention overall to human emotions than we talk about it a lot more openly now at IT leadership levels than we ever did before. And I can't see any downside to that.
Well, it's the people who do the work.
Yes.
And the system is as much about how you get all those people to work together as it is about the technology itself.
Yes, yes. And I think that message has truly, I think it truly resonates. I think it's really sunk in. I'm shocked to see we only have a few minutes remaining here. I did want to touch very quickly, is there anything about your enterprise data strategy that either I should have asked and I didn't yet, or something that you have changed about the way the teams are doing things?
So we have, I've got a bit of a data engineering background from my days in retail, so it's an area that's close to my heart.
Okay.
We have a lot of data, like everyone, structured and unstructured, of varying
mountains
types.
And mountain ranges of data, right?
In hundreds, if not thousands, of databases, and it's a mess. Not individually in any particular area, but as a collection, it's a mess. The data tends to exist in lots of different places. It's in whatever the source system is. It's in a data warehouse. It might be in a data lake too. It's in, some parts of it will be in a QA database, and some parts will be in some sub-application data mart somewhere.
You want to hope it's not in an Access database somewhere.
I actually had someone demonstrated something to me built on Access last week.
Seriously, we're talking 1990s, 1980s?
Yeah, I think it was the latest version of Access.
Wow. Oh, okay. Yeah. Who even knew there was one?
There you go. But anyway, so it's complex. It's hard to navigate. It's expensive because we're storing it in multiple places and we're paying for each of those places. And the ownership of the data is very hard to pick apart. And so if you want to get access to anything and you want to go and try and create value at the intersection of our different data sources, it's quite difficult. So what we're trying to do is to try and put a layer over the top of all of this to create a virtualized view on all of this information that says, I don't have to create a new data store to mash up the data from 2 or 3 existing systems. I can virtually define that.
Right.
I can go back to those systems and get the data itself. And I can create the views that I want to publish out to the organization for them to consume and I can do things like screen out the rows and the columns that have sensitive information in, and I can do that based on who's requesting it, so that I can be much more confident in letting that data flow more freely across the organization. because I know that there's only one place you can go to get it. I know who can get it, and I know what's in there.
And that's the built-in security of it as
Absolutely. And I don't have to deal with that in every single instance on the database or data lake that I'm storing this stuff on. So that's where we're trying to move to. And some good early wins, but still thousands of databases to go.
That's true. Yeah, there's many miles before you sleep. Yeah. And I can't let you go without answering my final question here about what the pandemic has taught you or changed in you as a leader.
So I think the pandemic has been horrible in many ways, but actually enormously helpful to the process that we've been going through in many ways.
Okay.
I talked earlier about a lot of the hard work that IT departments do being unseen. It suddenly wasn't unseen at the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
The IT organization were heroes.
Yeah.
And they were keeping the business running, and it was on them that everything depended. And I think that was really helpful in boosting the credibility of the organization at a critical time. The other thing that it's done is it's changed the way we communicate and collaborate. One of the things that Scott, my predecessor, and I decided to do very early on was to host a hangout every Friday morning. Every Friday morning at 8:30, and it's been going on for 2 years now.
Sleeping in on Fridays, huh?
Yes. There's a half hour open invite to anyone in the organization, and it's me and a guest having a chat. No prep, really. Just talking about their career path, what they're up to, what they're interested in. Maybe we'll highlight something good that's going on, or it may just be highlighting a person or a team that it's worth the organization knowing about. And we still get a few hundred people every week who join in, and some see it as the highlight of their week. It's a real sense of connection.
Well, and for a company that's in 130 countries and has 82,000 people,
right,
that would be pretty hard to accomplish.
Yes. And so I think it really emphasizes that flattening and that sort of globalization of the team, in the sense that it doesn't matter so much anymore whether you're in the UK or India or France or Mexico or Warsaw, because everyone's communicating in a similar way.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting as we start to go back to the office more and more. We're already seeing some of the challenges with hybrid, some of the plus sides too, but some of the challenges of it. How you maintain that sort of flatness and that sense of inclusion for the people that aren't in the big centers. And we'll be watching that closely.
Yes, I'm sure you will. Thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been especially nice to have you come into our offices here in Needham, Massachusetts. Fortunately for us, you live just a few minutes away. And this is, I think, the first time in more than 2 years that we've been able to have one of our guests come right in here. So thank you for that as well. And it was a great conversation. And I especially appreciated all of the questions from the audience.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
You're so very welcome. If you joined us a little bit late today, don't be kicking yourself. You can watch this full episode later today right here on LinkedIn. Also, you'll be able to see it at the end of the day on CIO.com. And we are also present on YouTube's Tech Talk channel. CIO Leadership Live is available as an audio podcast as well, wherever you find your podcasts. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation today, this very wide-ranging conversation today with CIO Paul Beswick of Marsh McLennan, and that you will mark your calendars to join me next time at noon Eastern on Wednesday, May 18th, when we'll hear from CIO Michael Steckert of Precision Medicine Group. Thanks so much for joining us today, and another thanks to our sponsor, Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. Please take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Tech Talk, where you can find all of our previous episodes of CIO Leadership Live. Stay well, and we'll see you back here next time.